Okay, thank you very much, and welcome to our final session of the day. A difficult slot for our final presenter because we've heard so much today and we've heard so many great speakers. But fortunately, we have to fill this slot a gentleman called Tommy Honey. Tommy Honey is a designer, he's a director, he's an educational manager, he's an architectural critic, he's an architectural commentator. I understand occasionally he's actually an architect. He is the Dean of Whitecliffe School of Art and Design, and he is also National Radio's Urbanist in Residence. To talk to us about the transformational power of urbanisation, please would you give a hand to Tommy Honey.
Hi. I was initially billed as an inspirational keynote speaker. I just want to let you know there was a typo. It should have said aspirational. I'm trying to become a keynote speaker, and this is my audition. So if you just fill out your evaluation forms at the end, I might be on my way. I have to say that after this afternoon's speakers, I feel entirely redundant. I've seen so much amazing stuff. All I want to do right now is sit down, and I would if the day hadn't been started by Nick Smith. So I'm here because I need to be. I have around 40 minutes of stuff to talk to you about and at least 2 hours of material, so forgive me if I don't hang around with an idea. After hearing Nick Smith this morning, I now have an additional 4 hours. I assume he didn't hang around. No, politicians, they never do. They're really good at talking, not so hot at listening. And wouldn't it be amazing if him or some of the people from his 3 ministries had sat here today? Are there any here today? Have I made a mistake? Are you here? No. Aren't they the people that need to be hearing this? Well, I have sad news for the good doctor. He left me feeling a little sick because he's that kind of doctor. The gist of what he said was that the government would do nothing and we shouldn't either. Business as usual, and apparently there's nothing wrong with greenfield development. There was his kind of veiled threat that if Auckland didn't deliver 30,000 new houses, that they would step in and do what exactly? Talk some more? It sounded vaguely like Labour's Kiwi Build policy. To this government, sustainability means sustaining the status quo. What most concerned me was his convoluted argument to say that urban sprawl might not be good, but it was definitely not bad. That he's said that his very limited parameters were that it won't hurt the farmers who are going gangbusters and the carbon footprint is a non-issue, but then the woeful performance in relation to carbon emissions by this and preceding administrations would indicate that carbon generally is a non-issue for all of them. I have absolutely no idea why this government has its head in the sand about intensification. I assume a pollster has told them there aren't enough votes in it. Warwick Quinn came on and told us that the biggest barrier to housing affordability is the cost of land, and how for reasons of capitalisation it is driving up the cost and consequently the size of the houses we build. Well, newsflash for Dr. Smith, this issue won't be any different for greenfield sites. Those developers whose votes he doesn't care about, he told us, won't be giving away land just because it's miles from the centre of town. If you don't make it easier for them to develop, they will simply pass on the cost to the voters that Dr. Smith likes, and we all lose. So if the cost of land isn't going to drop anytime soon, the only way to avoid over-capitalisation is to build 2 dwellings on a piece of land instead of 1, 4 or 6. It makes economic sense, but it won't get you into Parliament. Quality managed intensification is the key solution to the rising cost of land and consequently housing. And let me say right here that if we are in crisis right now, and I think we are, it is not because of intensification. After more than a century of greenfield development, it's not the fault of intensification. The greenfield experiment is over. It's time to try something different. Now, when I attended architecture school, and I did, and yes, I describe myself as a reluctant architect. I'll come off the bench if I have to. Sustainability was a dirty word. Well, if not dirty, then certainly tainted. It was an outlier, peripheral to the central march of mainstream architecture, which was stuck in a steady state of recycling styles and slapping new names on them. If you were interested in environmental issues, and confession, I wasn't, you joined the huddle around Tony Ward, explored the organic, and knitted underwear out of hemp. For in those days, and a long time afterwards, issues of sustainability and the environment were always kind of grouped together as if they were identical. Both often then associated, not only, it should be said by the naysayers, with spirituality and the self, and the 3Ms, muesli, macrame, and matariki. The solstice was in there somewhere too, and not far away its cousin solar, although solar would occasionally get mainstream treatment because it was kind of techie. Oh, how times have changed. Sustainability is out of the shadows, and it is now an integral part of the way we view the world, the way we operate within it, and how we seek to preserve it, which has never, until recently, been our mission. So why has this come about? 4 reasons: climate change, the internet, smartphones, and crowdsourcing. Where once we worried about acid rain and the hole in the ozone layer, the prospect of climate change has galvanized us like no other risk. Where previously all we had to do was stop a little polluting, change our deodorant from a spray to a roll-on, now the challenge is greater. The response to climate change requires collective action, for which, if the internet didn't exist, we would have had to invent it. While the internet is useful for sharing information, it only really comes into its own when it becomes active, not passive, and is a vehicle for change. But it has been the advance of apps on smartphones and how we engage with the world around us instantly, digitally, individually, and collectively that has made and will continue to make the biggest difference to how we act and live sustainably. This and the rise of big data means that through crowdsourcing we can identify what we need to do, take action, and then recognise change or do the evaluation, as Lucinda talked about earlier today. So I don't believe that we can view sustainable housing in isolation without thinking about a much, much bigger picture, one where sustainability permeates everything we do. We need a comprehensive approach and the permission, the freedom to spread sustainability like a virus. We need to think about whole-of-system approaches that address public transport, urban design, energy, waste management, social equity, and affordable housing. So, public transport. Have you caught a bus lately? Good. The train? Yeah, I thought so. It's obvious, really, we would all use public transport much more if it wasn't so, well, public. You know, it's dirty, it's smelly, it's crowded, and it's too cold, or it's too hot. Actually, these days, there are probably none of these, but our perceptions or prejudices are all powerful. We believe what we want to believe, and currently, even though we have options, car is king. And that is probably the problem with our options. They are too binary, public or private, with nothing in between. Not so in America, home of the automobile, individuality and the free market. Between these purely private nodes, entrepreneurs are finding ways to make commuting public without the smell. Plus, free Wi-Fi. So we need to make taking a bus or a train sexy, fun, essential, first choice, and the most fun thing we do in our working day. So this is what I want in a bus. I want the bus to know who I am and what I like. So let's say I take the same bus every day. My bus app knows this, and it knows where I live. It knows that it takes me 4 minutes to walk to the bus stop. So 8 minutes before it reaches my stop, whatever traffic it's in, I get a text telling me to get the coat on. At 5 minutes, it tells me to leave home, walk out the door, and lock it. I reply, confirming that I am intending to catch it. When I say I reply, I hit confirm. I never have to wait more than 1 minute for my bus. And if I get held up on the way, I slip over, whatever, I help an old lady across the road, the bus's version of the app sees that I'm on my way and it waits for me, up to 30 seconds, because it can see my little dot approaching it. As I board the bus, I swipe my card. A little green light beside a row lights up, identifying my reserved seat, which has my settings all ready and waiting. You laugh, but believe me, it's on its way. And you want me to get a bus, you do this. Aircon, my temperature, seat height. I sit down, I plug in my headphones or use my Bluetooth headphones, look at the screen on the seat back in front of me and see my personalised dashboard. Weather, email, stock ticker, the luminaries, last night's episode of Shortland Street. Were I single, I might hit the future life partner's near me button and see if any lights on the bus turn on. This is the business class of bus riding, and it is not so far away. Already a new wave of private buses are popping up in several big cities across the US. They are commonly known as amenitized buses for the amenities available on them. And they all seem to share in common luxury quality, promoting Wi-Fi and reserved seating, as well as a common mission to offer choice transit riders a better choice. In Boston, there's a service called Bridge. It's a private bus still in its testing phase. For $6 or 4 times the regular bus fare, it takes riders non-stop from Brookline to downtown Boston, Kendall, Harvard Squares and Back Bay. It uses data to identify key service corridors and offers the service only on these routes. And I will say that the Boston Metropolitan Service, the one owned by the city, publishes unbelievably excellent data that the public can access to find out about public transport movements. They make that public and open source. They don't keep that to themselves. So unlike the city's bus services, it has no responsibility to offer buses on all routes to all people. It simply picks the best routes and offers a premium service. Chicago has Black Line. It's a new service that runs from upmarket Lakeview area to the downtown loop. Total cost is about double regular fares, and the service is currently limited to 2 morning and evening buses along one route, but that's all they need to offer at this stage. If it proves popular, they'll just expand. There's also one called Leap Transport, which is in development in San Francisco. So a clear pattern emerges with luxury buses offering a higher price option to commuters. And in doing so, they are converting people who would not otherwise commute to becoming commuters, getting them out of their BMWs and into their office by offering something that they feel that they're happy to pay more for. They tout an advantage to overcrowded buses, and they all appear to have one in the an advantage in the form of a mobile office environment and a guaranteed seat. Now, it's far too early with these services to say what it will mean for the good and bad old city bus, but they do spark plenty of questions. Will the services disrupt traditional public routes, or will they serve as, in the end, high-end carpools for workers from similar neighbourhoods? Will the benefits they provide for the transportation network outweigh the harm they might cause to social equity, if indeed there is any? And what does it mean to have some Lexus comfort for those that don't want a Corolla ride? I think, though, we should go further. We should exploit the idea that the buses operate on a network that continue on the same cycle, going to the same places. Remember when our buses used to have a recess on the outside where you could load in your pram? Although, I have to say, I've actually no idea where you put your baby when you did this. On the ground? You know, where were they? In a seat? I'm sorry, I can't recall that one. I say bring back those recesses, but put them to use for recycling. So when I head to my way on the bus, I pick up last night's recycling in a plastic bag, and I carry it to the bus. I throw it in the side, and when the bus passes through the depot, it gets unloaded and goes into some recycling process that goes elsewhere. The transport is already there. The mechanism is there for us to do far more, but we are sending an unbelievable amount of trucks around every week to do different things when we could be using the services that are pre-existing. And when buses are truly driverless, and some of the leading driverless research programs actually are starting with public transport, not cars, we will enter the bus in the middle, not the front, so it's more economical for us to get to our seat. To be greeted not by a driver, but a barista. Your coffee will be ready and waiting because you ticked yes to a soy flat white when you confirmed your ride on your app. It'll have your name on there. In fact, what will happen is you swipe the card, you step up, and a little green light next to that cup will ding because it's yours. Take your seat. And on the way home at night, mine's a martini, vodka with a twist. Thank you. So what we are seeing internationally is a different kind of public-private partnership when it comes to public transport. Traditionally, we think of PPPs as being an investment model to finance large-scale infrastructure projects with the commercial benefit of cost recovery going to the partner from the end users via tolls or some system like that. Now new models are emerging where private companies are choosing to offer their services directly to the public, bypassing any formal partnerships with the local or central governments. Hence the amenitized buses and the proposed new rail system in Florida called All Aboard Florida. Starting in 2016, it's a new train service. It's going to run 32 departures a day between Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach, with a service extending to Orlando. They are laying their own tracks. They're not hiring them off Amtrak or anyone else. They are building their infrastructure because they can see, apparently there are 500 million trips, passenger trips between those cities every year, and passenger cars and all the other ranges of transport. They only need to get 10 or 15 million of those to be profitable, and they can see the value in investing in that because they see the market opening up for a fully private train service. So the next step in making public transport sustainable is to individualise the public-private partnership by using people, that's us, and our vehicles to participate and benefit and being the de facto providers of public transport. So essentially a peer-to-peer or person-to-person system. So recently we've seen the rise of ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft and Sidecar, and all of these services are actually changing the way that we think about public and private transport. And these real-time ride-sharing services, they operate a bit more like individualised on-demand carpooling, where traditional carpooling depends on regularity, arrangement and planning. Ride-sharing is immediate and one-off. And as these services increase, we will see a reduction in the number of cars on the road and ultimately a decrease in congestion. So consequently, the traditional forms of public transport, bus and rail, taxi too, will need to change to meet the needs of the digital age, making them more individualised and more responsive. But what could really revolutionise public transport is the utilisation of the mass of private transport, private cars, in a bid to make ride-sharing safe and ubiquitous. The key will be the use of smartphones, apps and ride-sharing services. Because Uber, Lyft and Sidecar are ultimately, they're just taxi services in disguise. They still rely on people for whom that is their primary job or primarily what they do. There is a new service in New Zealand, thank you Matthew, called Your Drive, where you can hire your car out when you're not using it, giving greater utilisation to your asset. And if you're a hirer, you don't need to own a car. If you only want to use one once every 3 months, you just subscribe to the service and get access to a car when you need to go away for that weekend, the trip to the dentist or whatever. But what if we went even further? Carpooling has always been a way of kind of connecting people to share a complete journey. What if your journey was broken down to a number of smaller, separate carpool shares? Our routes to work are often prescribed by their beginning and end points, and we assume that we must make this complete journey in the same car. What if commuting was like emailing? Emails work on a network of nodes that are essentially computers, and emails get to the destination by detecting the fastest route between the start and end point and bouncing through many nodes to do so. What if ride-sharing did the same thing? Worked out through crowdsourcing, big data, what was the best and quickest route through a series of nodes, road intersections, and available vehicles with drivers. So your ride-sharing journey might start with one car that drops you at an intersection, where the next car turns up moments later and takes you to the next intersection, and so on. You may share your several rides with several different people, all crisscrossing the car in different directions. But because the system has worked out the fastest route at that point, at a particular point in time of the day, you're actually getting there quicker than if you drove your own car. The next radical step will be when driverless cars are more established. So you trip through the ride-sharing network of nodes. It will be on a succession of driverless cars that stop to pick you up at the right time and place because their computer and your phone are communicating. And then we'll wonder why we have our own cars at all. When I come to think about energy, I want to know why our houses are not net energy generators instead of users. We need to turn our suburbs into fields of surplus energy. We should invest in and subsidise mini hydro, wind, particularly vorts, solar, of course. And here I have to ask, why don't cars have solar roofs? They drive outside most of the time. Surely some kind of solar cell arrangement on the area of a roof car, every car that you see on the motorway or in a car park, shouldn't that be delivering energy back to the system? I mean, what a no-brainer. But what I'm really excited about are communal solar arrays. So in the US, these were pioneered in Colorado and can now be found in Massachusetts and elsewhere. You live in a city with a small roof on your house or in an apartment with no rights to the roof it has, so you purchase a panel in a solar array in the countryside. The energy it produces out there offsets the energy you use in the city, and all that stands in the way are the power companies that want to control the means of production. I mean, how hard can it be to get past them, really? I say let them own the means of distribution, but let's open up production to the rest of us. Let us choose where we invest our energy dollar. With a power company directly, sure, keep doing that. Or by buying their shares, well, that was a big idea, wasn't it? Or my preference in a micro power producer of my choosing. Maybe me, might be my neighbour, it might be someone down in Tauranga. Now, I know the barriers to an idea like this are huge, and any number of power analysts will tell you about spot pricing and peaks and this, and they can't buy power off consumers at the same rate they sell it, and all they're doing is what Nick Smith wants them to do, which is keep the world the same. Well, if we keep the world the same, I don't think my grandchildren are going to enjoy it very much at all, and I know who they're going to blame. They don't know who Nick Smith is. They'll tell me off for not doing what I should have done in the first place, which is stand up here in front of you. The first big power company that gets this and understands this and changes the way they operate will be the one that is around for the next 100 years. This is also a key to regional development, where provincial towns could create solar arrays on unproductive land and export the energy to us power-hungry city dwellers. That Christmas gift for your mother, don't buy her a goat, buy her a solar panel. Waste management, like charity, begins at home. Yes, we're getting better at it, and the council here is very generous. He gives me a huge bin for recycling, which I inefficiently manage to overfill every 2 weeks. And there's only 4 of us, and 2 of those weigh less than 15 kilos. Somewhere, someone has paid minimum wage to sort it because I didn't have the inclination or the facility to do it first. Our kitchens are full of appliances that have been based on a 600mm module for years. But where is my underbench compactor composter? Not the toys that were available in the 1970s, but a serious effort at a device or devices that identify, sort, shred, compress, and compost, all in the reassuring comfort of my own home. Where's Fisher and Paykel on this? I mean, those guys, they can make food cold or hot, they can wash dishes 7 different ways, but they have no appliance for making the world a better place. I want to push all my food waste through a hole in my stainless steel bench into some thingy that devours it and turns it into a nice compact brick of compost, which I would take to the farmer's market of a Saturday morning and exchange it for a bag of potatoes. I would give the farmer back the potato peelings I got the week before, and he could take them back and put them onto his land where they came from in the first place. It's all very well for me to compost at home and grow yet more camellias, but I'm not sure that's really helping the cycle of where that compost should go to be productive. To start with Nick Smith's issues about urban design, and I think I just want to touch on this again. We live in a quarter-acre unsustainable Pavlova paradise, and our expectation to live this way is completely romantic and equally ridiculous. And I know that Warwick Quinn pointed out earlier that it never was a quarter acre, it was an eighth that we all grew up on, around about 600 square metres. But still we hold out this romantic ideal. And like all things romantic, it's a utopian ideal. It's impossible to achieve and unaffordable. If it was achievable and affordable, it wouldn't be called romantic. It is, of course, this is where I think the fault lies, fueled by a Luddite media that keeps putting on the front page tales of woe from poor couples 1 year out of university who can't afford to buy a 3-bedroom house in walking distance from the city centre. To them, I say, grow up, preferably in a small unit in a suburb far away. And when you've paid it off, move closer. You cannot have everything straight away. It does not work like that. So we have to collectively shift aspirations and temper ambitions. But more than this, we have to embrace intensification. And this does not mean forcing the good burgers of St Heliers into 45 square metre apartments next week, as they would have us believe, or that the unitary plan will make them do, but a gradual and managed process that gives our cities critical mass and stops them melting like an ice cream on a hot summer's day, uncontrolled into the countryside. And so, housing, finally. You know, I've never understood why the more we spend on a house, the more individual we expect it to be. Yet the more we spend on a car, the more the same it has to be. No one ever added value to a $200,000 Maserati by adding a roof deck, or a coffee machine, or a media room. Oh, hang on, they've probably got one of those, haven't they? With cars, status comes through the recognition of what the brand represents. Consistency with that brand is all important. Deviation breeds doubt. Pimp your ride and the value of the car goes down. Our houses are a reflection of self and a statement of identity. Or put another way, our houses are an expression of who we are, our cars an expression of who we want you to think we are. And so how do we crack this? And why do we need to? Well, let's assume that efficiencies in mass housing will lead to more affordable housing. Let's also assume that the way to those efficiencies is by making houses the same, not different. Then all that stands in the way is a mountain range of public opposition, suspicion, and entrenched cultural behaviours. But climbing a mountain is not the only way to get to the other side. What we need to do is shift those cultural behaviours, reorient social expectations, and recalibrate our sense of status. Maybe we just need a good marketing campaign. I mean, someone worked out how to sell Marmite. In the end, it doesn't actually matter what the house is, or building system, or process, or cladding, or kitchen. We just have to find a way to make people want identical houses rather than different ones. And 20 years ago, I would have said that this was impossible. Now, I'm not so sure. So what's changed? Well, climate change, the internet, smartphones, crowdsourcing. We have evidence that social behaviours can change radically, quickly, through technological innovation, and the public are surprisingly quick to accept it and to adapt. So now let's think of the house as a smartphone, as the hardware. Ubiquitous, yet well designed. Still has status attached to it. What we do with the house, what we choose to put inside, how we decorate it, occupy it, is the software, the apps. And maybe you want to put a candy-coloured case on the outside, I don't know. But the basic shell is the same. It is the vehicle for how you live. So pimp this ride. Go for your life. What is the shell, this ubiquitous thing? I have no idea. If I did, I would not be standing here. You'd all be living in one, and I'd be in the tropical island somewhere. I don't know what it is, but I've seen clues as to how we can at least start thinking about it. Who here has heard of the $300 house project, competition? Okay, good. I expected that. I want you to all go home and Google. Google now, if you like. A few years ago, the idea of the $300 house originated with an entrepreneur and marketer called Christian Sakar. He worked closely with Professor Vijay Govindarajan at Dartmouth, and they put together a blog post which they submitted to the Harvard Business Review. It then spawned a competition about trying to find someone to design the $300 house, literally a house that would cost $300 to build. And ever since then, people have been working out ways to meet this challenge. Govindarajan said the profit margins in such a venture would be wafer thin, but the volumes would be huge. The $300 figure was meant to attract people's attention, and I've got yours, in the same way as a $100 laptop or a $2,500 Nano did. Govindarajan said, we arrived at the figure $300 because the average house value for a Grameen member, if people understand the Grameen poverty process, who had escaped poverty was $370. But we know that housing problems cannot be solved through philanthropy or donation. It can only work if private firms participate in such a project. That is a challenge to make this idea work. It's not just a feel-good idea. You have to get private companies stepping up to do this. So in 2011, a self-organised team from an Indian company, Mahindra & Mahindra, won the corporate award with a design for a $300 house for the rural sector in India. Around the same time, the Tata Group, producers of the Tata Nano car, announced the launch of an ultra-low-cost flat-pack house designed for rural India. The basic model would be available as a 20 square metre prefabricated kit designed for on-site installation at the price of €500. They didn't hit the $300 mark. A larger model would be available at €700, and there are also plans for a house that comes with a solar panel on the roof. Pilot house is now being tested in 30 locations spread across India. Bill Gross, the founder and CEO of Idealab, worked with a team to design a $1,000 house for the poor, and he wrote that the lack of quality affordable housing to almost 1.5 billion people has always called out to me as a problem needing new and innovative solutions. We need to think big and deploy disruptive technologies and financing mechanisms to house 100 million people by the end of the decade, which is still only 7% of those people who can't afford housing. But I don't want to talk about their solutions. You can Google them, find them. There's plenty written about them. You can find it later. No, but I'm interested in the possibility that this idea has in driving reverse innovation. It isn't just for developing economies, because the lessons that can be learned by building a $300 house in India or Haiti or Indonesia could be translated back to build a $3,000 or even a $30,000 house in the US or Europe or New Zealand or Australia. The materials, design, layout will all be informed by the decisions made in the design of the $300 house. You work out what you can do for $300, the absolute bare minimum you need, and the innovations to achieve it, and $3,000 looks achievable. $30,000 looks like a luxury. So, let's think about it as a cell phone. You start with the cheapest phone you can build, then work up to the smartphone. You make it affordable for everyone, and you let them fit it out with the apps of their choice. So what innovations can we think of that will help us in affordable housing? And here all due respect to WikiHouse and the fantastic work they've been doing, they kind of undercut what I wanted to say, but CNC machines, perhaps the way of the future, and the idea that we'll have one for $500, I want one of those. Buy one of those and some material, and I can stop buying Lego for my son. Just use that. Make whatever you like. It's not out of plastic, it's just out of that preformed stuff that we ate last week and then put through that machine, and look, it's all hard now. There's an example I have. It's actually my brother owned a company, or developed a company in Auckland called High Modulus. It was an Auckland engineering company that specialised in the design of the structure of one-off yachts and selling the very high-tech fiberglass components and materials to make them. They realised that there was an untapped market in production boats that were all largely still made by hand. This is speedboats. A company might make 100 of them. So his company designed the software to create kit sets for production boat builders. They invested in their own CNC machines, and then they would send the value-added kit sets right out of their factory. They put machines in Australia, China, and the US, and eventually sold the company to a much larger Swiss-based company. In Wellington, Ben Sutherland and his team at Makers of Architecture have been investigating the same processes for architecture as have WikiHouses. And the Makers of Architecture put their ideas into practice in a building called the Warrender Studio, recently published in Houses New Zealand. They see themselves as makers, and from their website, they say, once the documents and digital files for the building components have been prepared, CNC machining technologies are utilised to cut out the building components. This advantages the building process both in the time it takes to assemble the building and also in calculated consistencies. Using this process minimises traditional building tolerance inaccuracies, allowing the structure to be assembled much like a jigsaw puzzle. Get out your mallet, where the building components fit together seamlessly. Other advantages of this process ensure that a building is constructed in a short period of time, as opposed to taking many months, also meaning exposure to weather and other uncontrollable factors are lessened substantially. But you knew all that because you were told that this afternoon on more than one occasion. So what can New Zealand do in this space? Well, we need to get government support from our wonderful advocates like Nick Smith, like him, for the R&D necessary to collectively invest in and design systems for producing houses on CNC machines, so we don't leave it up to or the hard work is not left to the people putting it in from the social end and WikiHouses and working all hours God sent them and more. We need to look at the centres for research excellence, the cores, the government funds that are full of scientists doing more biological research, which is really good for food nutrition, that are going to drive that part of the economy. But we have to open up this part of the economy by steamrolling through and saying the way of the future is we need to be in the space and we need to lead the world. How do we lead the world with this? Well, we export the IP, not the materials. We establish operations around the world that take advantages of local materials, and for once we should allow the tyranny of distance to work in our favour, not the other way around. If this government is truly interested in how we become an innovative economy that exports our technology and brain power. We've got to get beyond simply the better by design process and actually put it into action with initiatives that say we can do this better than anyone. Let's keep that software, the understanding here, but take the processes to the world, because if we can be smart about anything, this is one area we really could whip the ass off those people in America that don't know what they're doing. You only have to look at the wonderful examples of prefab architecture coming out of Dwell magazine and other issues to see fantastic things, but they end up being imitations of those too large houses we're building too many of. Let's revolutionize the world. It starts here. For those people trying to enter the housing market, and I know various people today have talked about the economies of this, I'm very interested in the financial instruments and how we can get them to work. We have to take a serious look at breaking down the traditional ways we finance housing, and I know Warwick talked about this earlier, the problems after a question about how developers are funding and the disappearance of that kind of financing, but also about how we fund people and how we get banks to trust funding the new builds. I'm interested in developing new financial instruments. The fantastic American podcast, Planet Money, recently had a show about a world without banks that described a website called Lending Club, where people could apply to borrow money and others could anonymously lend it. The website connected the two parties and the loans happened. There wasn't a bank in sight. Now, lenders could buy all or part of a loan. They could share or spread their risk. They could track how their loan was going, how it was being paid off. The loans were typically small, not that many over $10,000, and defaults occurred from time to time, but like most micro-banking systems, default rates were less than in the mainstream banking system. What if we could do that on a larger scale with house loans? There are bigger issues to do with securities, etc., and how you secure the loan, but someone smarter than me could work all that out. So let's say I had $500,000 to invest in. Second confession, I don't. 10 years ago, I might, like most of middle New Zealand, have bought a second house and rented it out, counting on the capital gain to make a return. In today's market, maybe not. As we all make collective efforts to drive down the cost of houses, I would expect to see the value of houses and the potential return from capital gains purely on their own to really plateau. So what if I could take that money and lend it to someone, or maybe 5 people, to give them a leg up? Perhaps I'm helping them get a deposit, or maybe the whole loan for a house. This is the traditional mom and pop loan that might help with a deposit. Well, 2 things have happened there. Not everyone has the moms and pops that have that kind of money, but given the way the economy has been going in the last 15 years, those mom and pops that might have the money might have enough of that for one of their children, but not all of them, or they might have enough for a deposit that might have bought you a house 10 years ago, but not now, not in the Auckland market. If you need 20% of $700,000, how many moms and pops have $140,000 sitting in the bank? So what about those people who do have that money in the bank that don't have children or have funded them? Those people who want to give not a little, but a lot, and think about how they can invest things. Years ago, they could have bought a house and become a landlord, and they would have put that house into the rental market. And they would have got a trickle of returns and a capital gain eventually, plus all the headaches of being a landlord. And believe me, who really wants all that? Now what you can do with that money, my $500,000, and ask me at 8:07 on Saturday night, and I'll be the one. I take that money, I distribute it to people in this anonymized system, but I can track who they are. Maybe it's got details about who is applying for a loan. I find out that they've got a steady job, they've had it for 10 years, they've not having any more children, this is their future prospects, this is their vision statement. I go, yeah, I like that. I'm going to lend them $100,000. I track their loan, they buy a house, their payments are good. After 2 years, I go, well, I'm going to sell this. I'm going to on-sell this loan to someone else, and I can because they've got a good payment record. And another person like me rocks up and says, yeah, I'll buy that loan. They don't want to try their hand on a new person. That's got a good performance. I'll take my proportion of that. I'm going to be getting maybe 0.25% over what the banks might lend on that, but it's still better than what the bank would give me if I tried to put all the money with the bank. So a truly peer-to-peer, person-to-person system would be far more enabling than me putting this mythical $500,000 I have with a bank and trusting them to make sound decisions about who to lend it to, all the while making massive profits and shipping them to Australia. An indirect effort effect would be to move my investment from the rental market to the owning market, thereby increasing the proportion of home ownership. Wrap it all up with some tax incentives, thanks Nick. After all, I'm saving the government from having to advance some money through home ownership loans. A few other benefits, and you've got a winner. I know it all sounds fruity and ridiculous and risky and fraught and subject to capture by, yes, the banks, but it's time for change. So now I think about social change, and we need to rethink the way we live and how we grow old. Right now, on the other side of town, the retirement village companies are having their conference where they are talking about the huge, massive growth, and I know Pamela's been over there today, massive growth expected in retirement villages that we have to embrace to meet only 10%, to house only 10% of the people who are going to be retired in the next however many years. At a private session behind doors, they're sitting talking about how their stocks have all gone through the roof. Well, good on them. 15 years ago, my parents sold their house and moved into a retirement village. They left their neighbourhood of 40 years, where 4 families had lived that entire time, and moved to a managed environment where they quickly made new friends with complete strangers. This is how I want to retire. I don't want to wait until I'm 80, and I don't want to live amongst strangers. I want to have some, but not all, of the freedoms I now enjoy. What if I could, with 2 to 4 other families, buy 2 to 3 properties somewhere where we'd really like to live? Bit of Grey Lynn, maybe, Mount Victoria, I don't know, some really fun suburb that looks pretty groovy, looks like me, not like someone else. We combine these properties, keep one house, perhaps split it between 2 families, and a house splitting is where we really need to go. Build a couple of smaller, smart houses for the other, so we are all sited together. And then, and this is the exciting part, we build a communal building that has a guest room, or rooms for grandchildren, a shared kitchen. We would all have places to cook in our own houses, but we have a shared kitchen so we can eat together. A library, just take all the books out of our house, out of our storerooms, off our shelves, put them all together, we can read each other's books. A media room, so we can sit together to watch on that really big screen England go out of the next World Cup. A medical unit with place for a nurse to stay overnight. Now, this extra little building doesn't have to be large, but it would be unbelievably useful. So what are the barriers to this? Well, legal issues about ownership, but I'm sure models could be developed to resolve this. There would be ways around this. Town planning rules that don't allow for this kind of communal development. Really, that's where we have to start. You know, at the moment, were my parents still alive and they didn't go to a retirement village, I'd be allowed to build a granny flat and give them 15 square metres on the back of the land and, you know, put up some kind of little box, because that's what we do to our old people, we flatten them. And that mentality is, I mean, the other thing about this retirement village that Mum and Dad went to, it was great, but man, were they hideous to look at. They fitted out with all these cliched ideas of how old people want to live with, you know, in a doily universe, you know, with these frou-frou, frilly bullshit. My parents, you know, 10 years earlier had done up their house. They had a brand new kitchen. They had all this latest lighting. They got all this. They had the stuff, and now they have to say, "Oh, no, you can't live like that anymore. You're no longer contemporary. You're old. Come over here." You know, I mean, it is so artificial and so inappropriate. And what's more is these retirement villages, they had an absolute place. They had a ball there. They loved it. It was great for them. Really good. These villages work really well, but they're based on a model of someone else making decisions for you. Well, that is so premillennial. This is a century of us making decisions for us about whether I pick you up on the side of the road so you can go in my car so you can get to work and you get out and you give me $2, or whether I get a coffee on the bus on the way to work, or whether I donate invest in some money into someone I completely don't know to make their life better, because I want to go peer to peer and I don't want these institutions or the government standing in my way. So yes, this kind of disruptive approach, it seems obvious to me. Why should we contribute to the profits of Ryman or Somerset or MetLife Care when we can individually and collectively build our own retirement compounds? It's all about change. We have to change the way people think, and it is actually not as hard as you think. If we go back to what Lucinda quoting Margaret Mead, it only takes a handful of us. And change is already happening. Remember the climate, the internet, smartphones, crowdsourcing? The future will be crowdsourced. We will own it, shape it, and we will demand and get the cities we want. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tommy. That was fantastic. Does anybody have a quick question for Tommy? I think lawyers are waiting outside for you.
Ask me at the drink.
That brings us kind of to the end of our formal proceedings today.